Start webinar.
Oops, I was supposed to do that. I'm sorry, everyone. Welcome everyone to the August meeting of the Equal Access Book Club. When the Guide to Assisting Students with Disabilities, Equal Access in Health Science and Professional Education was published in 2015, it filled a gap for those of us involved with the education of students with disabilities in the health sciences. Since then, much more has been written about students with disabilities and accommodation, so we're excited to bring you this book club that reviews the second edition. Today, we'll be covering Chapter 11, Do's and Don'ts for Working with Students with Disabilities by Elisa P. Laird, Lisa M. Meeks, and Grace, our very own Grace Clifford. Before we get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about ourselves. My name is Bill Eidston. I am Director of Learning Support and Accessibility Services at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth in Hanover, New Hampshire, and a former member of the coalition, a former board member of the coalition. Grace?
Yeah. So I'm Grace Clifford. I'm currently the Director for Disability and Testing Services at Cleveland State University, located in Cleveland, Ohio, and I oversee all delivery of services to undergrad, grad, and professional programs, which includes a number of graduate and professional health science programs.
Thank you. And we want to make sure we give a word of thanks to all the contributing authors. The second edition of the book would not exist really without the fantastic editors, Lisa Meeks, Nira Janes, and Elisa Laird. There are many others who have contributed to this book, and we are grateful to all of the authors who are listed on this slide for their time and talents. Give me a second to take a look. Then, and this Equal Access book series would not exist without the support of several key groups. Ahead with the Association on Higher Education and Disability, their assistance on this Zoom platform has been invaluable. We thank them. The coalition, namely the Coalition on Disability Access in Health Science Education, the designated interpreters who are doing the captioning for us today, and Springer Publications, our publisher. We're grateful for their support and for this novel way to explore the second edition of Equal Access for Students with Disabilities. All right, so we're just going to go over some guidelines for today's book club discussion. As moderators, our roles are to pose some questions based on the 11th chapter of the book, Do's and Don'ts, and to facilitate a discussion among all of you. We ask that you please be civil and respectful and encourage participation and support for each other as we navigate the multiple perspectives of our audience so that we can learn from one another and grow as a community. The best way to engage in the discussion on Zoom is by using the raise hand function. If you do that, then we can call on you and ask you to unmute to speak. If you do not want to raise your hand, another option is to post a comment in the chat function. Questions to the moderators can be placed in the Q&A feature. We would love to hear from as many of you who are comfortable in joining in and sharing your thoughts, experiences, and wisdom. So please speak up if you feel comfortable. To encourage participation, everyone who actively participates in this meeting by posting a question or comment will be entered into a drawing for a free book. We'll keep track of our participants and we'll have a random drawing at the conclusion of this meeting, so don't forget to participate. So let's get started. I believe, Grace, you may have something you wanted to share prior to diving in, or no?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to let everyone know or remind everyone the Coalition Symposium this year will run the 2 days concurrent to the AHEAD conference, which is located in Cleveland, Ohio this year. And that's from July 18th to 20th of 2022. The coalition is also looking for suggestions for the next book club. So if you have any recommendations, please send those to the coalition email, which is hsmcoalition@gmail.com. And I'll make sure to put that in the chat as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. All right. So I'm going to start with the first question I posed to everyone. What are some of the reasons why faculty should not take it upon themselves to provide accommodations to students directly without having them go through the disability office? And what steps can be taken on campus to ensure all faculty are aware of the role of the disability office plays in ensuring accommodation plans address barriers faced by students? Okay. Let's see, Marie.
Hello, happy Friday.
Hello, Marie.
This is Marie from Russian George with me as always on Friday afternoons. But yes, to answer the question or to start the discussion, having faculty, they should not take it upon themselves to provide accommodations because it undermines the policy and processes our offices put into place. But again, easier said than done, I think, for those of us who are working with clinicians, because I think they do have they wear their clinical hats sometimes when they should be wearing their faculty hats. So it really comes down to our office to create those processes and get as much time in front of faculty to let them know where to go for this information. So when a disclosure is made, that they just have a great sentence ready to go to just say, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I want to refer you on to the office of fill in the blank staff member to discuss what this might look like here and what the institution can do to support you in regards to that. I think that's something I've become in more practice the start of every semester, especially when we're coming up on orientations in the fall. So those are just some things that I thought about.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Marie. I think I don't know the order here. Maybe I think I see Sue. Let me allow you to talk, Sue.
And I see there's a comment in the chat. It says they are not an accommodations designee. They are not fully aware of students' disability. And it says workshops from the campus support or disability office would be best to present this information. From Erica.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sue Nam. I'm Director of Academic Support here at UCLA's David Geffen School of Medicine. And this is my first session joining you guys, so I'm really excited. So yeah, I would say that, and I read the chapter, but I realized I only have the first edition. So I'm hoping for good luck on the book draw. So I can get the second edition. I would say, one of the big things is the legal piece, where if, you kind of open whoever does offer accommodations, if they're not kind of aware of the legal mandates, they're not in that official capacity to adjudicate that, they kind of open themselves up to accusations of either favoritism or what is that called, discrimination or arbitrary kind of treatment of different students. If you're going to give it to one on the basis of, some kind of arbitrary standard, it kind of opens that faculty member up, or the university even, to kind of accusations of legal discrimination.
Absolutely. There's definitely some risk there. One thing that I, think of too is, we as disability resource professionals, I mean, we put in a lot of work into, sort of really, going through the interactive process, really, trying to think through, what might be helpful for a student. And, sometimes even in their, I think in their efforts to support students, and it comes from a good place, but, there's, it's unlikely that they're going to, put as much care and thought into this work that we have, and that's really an important part of the process, right? Is really being deliberative about how we arrive at these decisions. So that's another thing to consider. I think in the chat, I think it was Erica kind of alluded to the second part of that question. So I'd be interested to hear what others have to say about, some of what could be done, to sort of standardize or get faculty and others up to speed on the role that the office plays, and maybe some of the policies and procedures. It'd be interesting to hear if anyone else can speak to that.
Hello, this is Dina Leland from UNLV. I am a disability specialist focusing mainly on health sciences. And we train, we give presentations to about 80 to 85% of our departments each year to help them understand the role of the DRC, the role we play, and the role they play in that process. But regarding accommodations in the classroom, I usually find that instructors are just trying to be nice. So a student comes up and says, hey, I have accommodations, but can I also have this, or can I have that? Or I had accommodations in the past. I'm not registered with the DRC here, but can I have this? And they're trying to be nice, to which we tell instructors, you know, it's your classroom. You can do anything you want. If you want to say yes to a specific student request, you can say yes because they're a student in your class, not because they receive or want to receive accommodation. So if someone asks, for example, a 2-day extension on an assignment, if you would say yes to any one of the students in your class, yes, you can do that, but you can't do it because it's an accommodation that's they're asking for that's not in place.
And I think that's a really important kind of teachable moment with faculty, is to say, you know, as long as you're consistent in your application and it's not specifically because of the medical need, you know, and this is how you handle it for any student, that's fine. But when it crosses that lane, you know, the importance of sending it over, you know, to protect the student, to protect them, to protect the institution. I think those are really important, you know, teachable moments to have with faculty, and agree that traditionally they just want to be nice. They don't want to seem to like they're being cold and forcing students to go through a process because they can't be bothered.
Okay.
I wanted to read, Raina, I saw commented as well, you could share the coalition website and coalition corner articles to faculty and communicate, which is huge. Great example.
All right, well, thanks, guys. Let's move on to our next question.
All right, for question 2, what unintended consequences may occur if a faculty member doesn't adhere strictly to the accommodations plan specified by the disability office? As a follow-up, is there harm in the faculty member doing more for the student than specified in the accommodation plan communicated by the DRP? Which is a little bit kind of what we were just, you know, discussing, but some further comments would be helpful. Comments? So in terms of just starting it off, what are some unintended consequences that could occur if a faculty member kind of goes rogue from an accommodation plan or doesn't follow an accommodation plan? We have a comment. Let me open that. From Laura, it says a student might not get the accommodations in the future from someone else. That is, you know, really important. I talk a lot with the instructors about kind of the consistency piece and the importance of that from a compliance standpoint. And then I see Brian said students may expect these extra supports in other courses. That's a great point as well, Brian. I talk a lot about that with faculty, you know, when they say, especially when a student might disclose a disability, that instructor for one reason or another, you know, is very sympathetic to and kind of provides additional supports. We talk about how kind of down the line they could run into a wall they weren't expecting because, you know, things have been, you know, in some cases modified or kind of gone beyond reasonable accommodations. So that is an important point, that teachable moment with the student so they know what to expect. Other unintended consequences. I know for me, one thing I talk a lot, oh, there's another one from Christine, potential liability for the school as the process has not been established or followed. That is true as well. In a similar vein, sometimes I talk to programs about, you know, setting a precedent. You know, sometimes they see it as something they do as a one-off for a dire situation, not realizing that, you know, if we're looking at students with similar approved accommodations, that they might not know the reason for, you know, the other student might have disclosed to them, the precedent still might have been set, so the door might have been opened. And so trying to figure out kind of the best way to navigate that is to just make sure they're conferring with the disability office. Those are all good ones. For the second part of the question, thoughts on, is there harm in a faculty member doing more for the student than specified? I know we kind of touched on that as well. Other potential kind of harms that could occur. I know for me, the other thing I talk about is quite often about the documentation and kind of tracking of the interactive process, and explaining to faculty that I think sometimes on the surface it might seem like we just review this, it's a standard practice and we determine the accommodations, but when you explain how full and robust the interactive process is, and when we're not able to document that, the other kind of potential compliance concerns or litigation concerns can be eye-opening for faculty as well. Another comment. So Brian said treating or being perceived as treating a student different due to a disability is an excellent point as well. And that could be kind of in a positive or negative way. Students can feel like it's being unfair or discriminatory. And then Dina, it might encourage students to, again, seek accommodations directly from other faculty. And I also think that's a great point. I quite often use that in my faculty trainings to explain that, especially if someone is a new faculty member and not as familiar with the campus or what is a reasonable accommodation, it might be hard for them when a student kind of reaches out to them, directly. And again, students might then perceive these faculty that kind of direct students through the approved process as being cold or uncaring. I hear that a lot, that, they were kind of off the books accommodated for a period of time, but, the instructors they now have as juniors, just aren't kind or considerate or, empathetic, which certainly isn't the case. They're just following the process. Those are excellent. All right, so if there's no other comments, in the interest of time, we can move on to question 3.
All right, let's do it. All right, so health science campuses employ many clinician and health professional faculty members who have expertise in diagnosing and treating various health conditions. What boundaries should these trained professionals set when speaking to students about their disabilities? And why is it important for faculty members to set their clinical hat aside to maintain an effective student-faculty relationship? And again, I think there's, like the previous questions, there's going to be some overlap from our previous discussions, but I'm interested to hear what people have to say about, how clinicians, people who are trained to diagnose, it's ingrained, how important is for them to set aside, and what can be some of the problems around that? Okay, let's see. Let's see. All right, so Marie, you can go ahead.
Hi, Marie from Rush again. I know it comes from my office that when I speak with my faculty, I remind them all the time, it is not your job to take disclosures and, to treat or diagnose. However, we can't stop it from a student obviously making a disclosure. So it kind of goes back to giving the faculty the tools to say, I know it might be hard for you to hear a story from the student and have some idea of what their treatment should or could be, but that's not your role. Your role is faculty, and it needs to be very clear. Again, easier said than done sometimes, but that's why we just continue to remind our faculty each semester by sending out emails like, hey, this is what's going on with the Office of Student Accessibility, getting in front of them for those trainings, because it is hard. And I acknowledge that with the faculty. I said, I know that your full-time job is to do this, but when a student says something like this, that's where you have to pump the brakes and just, again, go back to that, dialogue that you can train them to have is, thank you for sharing that. Now I'd like to kind of talk to you about who can provide you some support and give you some guidance in this area. And then remind faculty that when these disclosures come out, that they do need to keep them confidential as well. But it's hard because our faculty think that when they are, that they're helping the student. And, it comes from a place of help and support, but you really have to guide them on that.
It's your place of control.
Thank you. There was a comment from Dina, who writes, sometimes health science professionals want to diagnose an issue, or if a student self-discloses that they feel that the recommended accommodations are not appropriate. They want to make the decisions of accommodations based on an implied or directly disclosed diagnosis, right? So they essentially they want to go rogue because they think they know better. And I think that, you know, in this scenario, this is an especially you know, potentially problematic area, largely because, you know, even though they are clinicians and they're making the diagnosis, I mean, if they're in a faculty role, they're in a position of assessing, grading the students, you know. And so anytime you're in this teacher function, right, you have to be especially careful because, you know, if there's if there's an implied diagnosis, you know, there's a real risk for, you know, a student claiming discrimination. You know, oh, this professor assumed that this faculty member assumed that I had some sort of disability, and I was somehow negatively impacted by that assumption, right? So I think it's I think it's really, really important for faculty to understand that, you know, that there could, you know, that with the best of intentions, that this really can, you know, and I've seen it occur, like this really can come back to sort of, you know, to have some really, you know, negative consequences for the institution as we're trying to sort of support our students. Does anyone else have any insights or comments that they'd like to share? Experiences?
It was a quick, oh, might have one hand, as a quick, oh, I see Christine was on here. So let me turn her on. Go ahead, Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine. I'm the Director of Disability Services at the Icahn School of Medicine. We have a medicine and graduate health science programs in New York City. I had a situation once where a faculty member was on rounds with a medical student and a variety of other professionals. So there were other medical students, there were residents, fellows, and they were in a patient room and having a conversation with a patient about a specific diagnosis and long-term prognosis. And then they left the room and the faculty member turns to the student and says, "You're having those same symptoms right now, aren't you?"
Oh, no.
And the faculty member was dead on. Obviously a really, really skilled diagnostician. And this poor student was standing there like a deer in the headlights thinking, you know, how do I professionally and graciously get out of this? Like, I don't want to have this conversation. I'm not even sure I want to have this conversation with the faculty member. I certainly don't want to have it in front of the whole team, right? So I think that's one of the most egregious examples that's happened on our campus. And then how to delicately, you know, provide feedback to that faculty member that, you know, you were right. So in some form, congratulations, right? You're really good at your job. But that was a really inappropriate way to approach this student, you know, and also why, you know, there were no concerns about this student's performance or there were no questions about the accommodations the student had. So I'm not sure why the faculty member started a conversation like that. But so I think that made me think a little more broadly in terms of faculty trainings and the kinds of things that I cover when I talk to faculty members. You know, I think sometimes our faculty tend to think in terms of us and them, and somehow the medical professionals are well, and, you know, and they're not thinking about the fact that the students or, you know, other members of the team or their, you know, friends or family might have the same kinds of medical diagnoses as the patients they're treating, and like how to manage that appropriately in that setting.
And that was, you know, my side comment is the importance of the kind of proactive faculty programming and connections, because the more the faculty and the programs see the disability office as a support and an ally, you know, when things do come up, you know, they'll look to you first to give some guidance and direction, you know, and make sure they're handling it the right way. And having anecdotes like the one that Christine just shared about, what can happen if things go wrong, can be really, really valuable, because some things might just seem like a no-brainer and, how would that occur? But when you bring it up and say it does occur, and that's just, how we've seen it, at other institutions or at our own institution, can be helpful. I think it also, if you do that proactive programming, you can assess kind of where they're at and meet them where they're at. So for some faculty, certainly the fear of litigation or compliance concerns is going to be more impactful in getting them to kind of jump on board with kind of policies and process. But for others, it's really about doing the right thing and meeting students where they're at, but wanting to do it in a sensitive and, careful way.
Any other insights, questions? Okay, let us move to the next slide.
So question 4, why is it critical that disability resource providers keep all information pertaining to student diagnoses confidential? What methods should be in place to ensure the security of these documents? So for the disability resource providers on the call today, sharing how, you do programming around that, or how you handle it at your institution, would be a great thing to share. I see we have something in the chat. Marie said all diagnostic information lives in her office and is for her eyes only. And Christine said she agrees with Marie. And that's certainly similar. FERPA is a reason it is important as well for the Privacy Act in higher ed, with Dina's comment. That is a piece as well. And kind of what we just touched on. Christine just said, in terms of accommodation letters, they need to ensure those are secured, not left out in the open. That's an important point as well. For those, I don't know how many use some kind of case management system like AIM or Clockwork or Advocate, which is Accommodate, I think, which helps a little bit with that with emails. But if you're still using hard copy letters, that's important. I know at my last institution, when we still had hard copy letters, faculty had a bad habit of receiving those at the end of class and then forgetting them on a podium or on a desk. Makes it a little bit easier. So, all right, a couple more comments here. So,
Same here.
and then I see Christine says, in terms of accommodation letter, conversations regarding accommodations need to be held privately. That's true as well. And I know that's a common question from faculty is, what to do if a student kind of comes up at the end of class and isn't the most private location, and how to kind of guide them through that process. I see Megan said, same here at UW, where they work, they have an internal database system called MyDRS that is visible only to them and the student. In the faculty notification letters, we only share the accommodations and nothing about disability specifically. And everything is electronic for us as well. And then Raina said, we get ACC memos, yet documentation lives with our disability office on main campus. That sounds like most people are using a case management system, which is helpful. One interesting point that I know that's made in the book regarding some of the electronic systems is just regarding forwarding. So I don't know how many individuals get questions or see this where there might be a TA that's facilitating, a lab section of a course, and the whole letter is just kind of forwarded on to the TA. But in the book we touch on the fact that really we should be making sure that the information disclosed to the TA is specific to kind of their need to know. So if they need to know that because they have to set up some form of testing accommodations, but there's also reference to attendance considerations or time off for medical appointments, we're removing those pieces of knowledge in the communication to the TA. So maybe it's just letting them know, this student requires time and a half in a quiet space.
I'm curious to know how many, are there any resource professionals on here who make accommodation determinations via committee? I'm not sure how many people do that. Are there? Are there folks here? And if so, I'm wondering, how do you manage? We do with complex, okay. And in those cases, I'm curious, how do you, how do you manage keeping the information, sensitive information confidential? Here, I'm allowed to talk about it.
So up until 2 months ago, we actually made all accommodation decisions as a committee, but now we've started doing direct assignment for most accommodations. But if we were to convene what we call a documentation review committee, then that would consist of individuals in the DRC office, and we would log in, we would review the documentation, we would discuss potential accommodations, and then if needed as part of the interactive process, and this often happens in the clinical setting, if we needed additional information about the clinical environment or the structure of rounds per se, then we would gather that from whichever unit we needed it from, and we would kind of bake that into our analysis. But like everybody else, diagnostic and disability information lives with us, and then we share out basically the final determination. So we would gather information from whomever had it and include them to the extent appropriate and what was needed to have a robust deliberative interactive process. Does that help?
Yep.
Any other comments on question 4 before we move along?
Well, I have a statement that may be a question. So I think, like a lot of people, we're having some clinical faculty that either really want to know the diagnoses, or that they want to kind of insert themselves into the interactive process. And I'm just wondering if there are specific things that you've done to kind of address that curiosity and direct that energy in more productive ways.
Yeah, so I mean, for one piece, certainly in terms of the interactive process, like the faculty are part of the interactive process in terms of, potentially being a subject matter expert on the course, the rotation. So getting the information about kind of the what the student will need to do so we can determine what a reasonable accommodation might look like. I do very much involve them, and I have done some programming and done some presentations before on the faculty's role in the process, where I kind of do a flow chart to say, okay, here's my role in the process and what it looks like, and here's your role in the process and what it should look like, and then here's what it'll look like at the end. And as I'm explaining those steps, I always explain the reason certain information is not shared with them. That some of that is certainly to protect them, it's to protect the student, it's to protect the institution, and to also that's where I give anecdotes of that the diagnosis isn't the important piece. It is, what is the barrier, and do they qualify as a student with a disability under the ADA? And that's my role in the process, to determine if they qualify as an individual who's eligible for services under the ADA. And if we're trying to determine if it's reasonable, like I'll ask specific questions based on the barrier information, which is the more important information, not the specific diagnosis, to determine, if something's reasonable or if we can accommodate it. And so when I usually explain that to them and say, help me understand why you would feel the specific diagnosis is needed. And, if they say, well, somebody with X, might need, X, Y, or Z, but I don't think that's reasonable, I'll say, okay, but here are 3 different types of disabilities, all have that similar barrier. Do you feel the same way about the other 2? And quite often the answer is no. So sometimes it's reframing and then just reinforcing the importance of kind of, again, I hate to use the fear of litigation piece sometimes to help with faculty jumping on board, but I think if you explain, at the end of the day, I have to document if we say no, it's my job to say no, and it's my job to document it. So if a complaint is made, like, it's gonna be my name on that complaint, and I have to kind of fill all this stuff in as we go along. I also share with them, like, it might seem like I'm asking questions and it's frustrating to them because I'm not a subject matter expert in that specific clinical rotation or that specific course, but I always tell them, like, I have to ask these questions because that's part of the interactive process and that's part of, my documentation process. So I said, it might seem like I'm questioning you and not believing you, but that's not the case. This is me doing my job, within the interactive process role. And so sometimes that helps with them pushing back and sometimes. All right, so we have another comment from Lisa. It says, Lisa says, medicine is a practice of multiple specialists. We are one part of a team specializing in specific area. Together, we will determine the appropriate response. Physicians understand the need for experts or specialists. And then I work closely with faculty, which is both educational, bidirectionally, and helps build a relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's a good insight, Lisa. I mean, we occasionally will have faculty who want to know more about, a student's specific condition, but more often what I find we are a small school, and I have I think, our office is seen as a resource and is seen as, something to support both students and faculty to make our students successful. But more often, what I find is that faculty are coming forward, with concerns about students, that could go into the realm of disability, of having, let's say some sort of learning disability or something like that. And so navigating those discussions is can be a little tricky as well, because again, they're well-intentioned, and they're talking to you, that you're both sort of talking as experts, or more or less. And so like Grace mentioned, I tend to bring it back to the discussion of barriers that exist, the barriers that exist in the learning environment. And really sort of turn the conversation, as much as possible to, okay, what's going on, and what are some of the things, that might be helpful, for the student that you're concerned about, and really, the subtext is for all of your students typically, that might, that we might consider that might help, the students be successful in your classroom. So, great, and that kind of, I think, unless there's any more, let's see if there's any more comments. No. Anyone else? Okay, I think this kind of leads into our next question nicely, actually. Okay, so question 5. When a faculty member receives information about a student's accommodation, it is inappropriate for the faculty member to ask questions about why the accommodation is necessary. How can faculty members offer support without inappropriately asking for details about a student's diagnosis? I think I think this raises the importance of really having faculty and staff in general, and really having staff and faculty in general aware of the different supports that exist in the organization, right? And really being comfortable and knowledgeable enough to help point students in the proper direction to get the support that they need. Whether it's so this could move beyond just the accessibility services, disability services office, to student affairs, to the office for diversity and inclusion, as schools have them. So there really is, I think that's really, really important. Something that I found useful is standardizing and getting our faculty and staff to recognize what is available, and sort of, making it, and making sure that they know, if they, certain things come up, certain concerns come up, these are directions that they can point the students to get the appropriate support. I see there's a couple comments. Dina writes, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was like, Dina said faculty can ask how to best implement the accommodations for the student. This one, I think it's certainly good to always, encourage that interaction between the faculty and the student. Sometimes I think it's difficult when faculty, I see this a lot where they want to insist students come and talk to them about their accommodations, very well intentioned, but, there is that power differential there. So for some students, they might need some assistance in facilitating that accommodation or that discussion. And the other piece is obviously kind of giving some direction to it. Because, for some accommodations, there are parameters. We see a lot of parameters with attendance accommodations or, kind of extensions. So making sure the faculty are aware still where the expectations or reasonable lines fall with those accommodations while encouraging those discussions are helpful. I also saw Christine said normalize that accommodations have been provided and clarify how implementation will take place and decide with the student who needs to be included in the conversation so appropriate supervisors are aware. So kind of similar vein to really encouraging the student or to be aware of kind of the communication process. Erica says they can refer the student to the academic support / disability services department, as well as meeting with this department to understand the accommodation process institution.
Maria, I see you have your hand up, but is that a hand up from before? So, okay. Oh, it's a new one. All right. Well, there you go. Let's go ahead.
Thanks. I wanted to speak on this because I just had a really wonderful experience actually with 2 faculty members and a student this afternoon. And I've been working with my faculty the past few years, and they were afraid. I got asked the question, am I allowed to ask them questions? And I said, well, what are you hoping to gain? Are you asking for what is your diagnosis? Because we got to toe the line on the questions like that. But I said, if you have an accommodation letter, and I said, there's nothing wrong with having a conversation with the student to say, how do you learn best in this setting? What do you see, or what barriers are you encountering that we may not be aware of? And one that was that came out of this discussion today in our anatomy lab, we have a student utilizing a motorized wheelchair navigating through the gross anatomy lab. And he goes, the new garbage cans that you guys had come in, they have the push pedal to open them to throw your gloves away. He goes, I can't press the pedal because they used to just be an open garbage can. And the faculty were like, we didn't even think about that posing a barrier. And he goes, I noticed when my classmates, press the button, I, press the pedal, I just throw my gloves in with it. So they're there to help. He goes, but it wasn't there before when the lab started, but it's here now. And so you told me to keep you apprised of barriers I encounter. And so it's these conversations, I think, that we all step back and learn from. But again, it's within the right context, not what is wrong with you and why are you using accommodations versus what do you know best about yourself? The student is the expert in themselves. So how can we get that conversation going in a very safe way that protects the student's confidentiality, but also gets us to know more about their experience. So that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, it's an interesting programming point too. I try to coach students on, what are questions they might, run into from faculty or TAs, and what is potentially an appropriate, question, or, if it's something makes them feel uncomfortable, letting them know that we're a resource for them to come back to. And then conversely doing that with the faculty as well, like kind of priming them for what are kind of the appropriate discussion points and resources. So, if something comes up and they're like, well, I don't know if this is reasonable to ask me as a student, that they know what those resources are to encourage, like, so they don't just feel like, don't cross go, don't, collect $200, don't have any type of conversation.
Any other comments or insights, questions? Marie writes, I always prepare my students to have a professional response in the event that they are ever asked, why do you have accommodations? Or what is wrong with you? Those questions that often. Okay. All right. And I will advance to our slide.
So for question 6, what are the key principles of universal design in education? And if you can give a few examples of how these principles can be implemented in a classroom to promote inclusion of students with disabilities while also serving multiple learning styles of non-disabled students. I see we have a couple comments. One from Lisa saying, agree there's a way to share insight without disclosure. And then one from Lisa Meek saying, be sure to check out the communications chapter. There's a student portion to aid students in communicating with faculty, like Marie said. Thank you for those. All right. So with universal design, within, your role for those that are disability resource providers, how many of you have done some programming or discussed kind of potential use of universal design? I see JT says captions. Hi, all. I'm new here working with the Charlotte of UNM. I'm hard of hearing myself and a champion for captions for everyone. Yes, captions is for me one of my, I would say, soapboxes. That captions are not only helpful for students who might be hard of hearing, but also obviously for students who might be in settings where they can't use the sound or something like that. All right. And Marie, is that a new one as well?
Who is someone raising their hand? Let's see. Oh, sorry.
Marie says, oops, but happy to talk. Go ahead, Marie.
Yeah, well, definitely captioning. And I think, during the pandemic, that really brought to light many of our institutions' archaic practices and just not being familiar maybe with captioning across the board, as many of us maybe thought we were. And also welcome JT to the group. It's always good to see new people, new names in these book clubs. So yay, 2 new people so far this week. That was a big one. And also captioning for individuals who English is a second language, that also is helpful. But I've even had other students just in passing mention that it's been beneficial just because there's so much content going out. It's nice sometimes to read the words along with, I'm not saying all the captioning is always accurate, but it gives them something better to have. The other thing we are working on in regards to universal design at our schools, we're trying to get more of our testing sessions across the board to just have our faculty get in the mindset of when you create an exam session, think about just having the time and a half built into it. So we're not having our students with accommodations come excessively early or coming at an alternate time. Why not just block that time so the time is already built in? But I know a lot of people have discussed that. It's like our unicorn that we're all aiming to get to. But those are just 2 little things that we're working on too.
Thank you. At our institution, I think there's a culture element too. I mean, in our institution, there is this, we have faculty who like to do it themselves and have done it the way that they, like they posted their slides or created them in their instructional materials in a way, and it's worked for them. And so, there is a little bit of resistance sometimes, when you're asking them to sort of think more broadly about how their materials might be more accessible. I'm wondering if anyone has sort of had, have anyone experienced pushback from their faculty as they've sort of tried to adopt or implement or make people more aware of some of the principles of universal design and some of the some of the ways that you've been able to sort of maybe bring your faculty around. Marie says she's tired of hearing, but that's how it's always been done. Go ahead, Christine.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
So I had a faculty member, I did a whole universal design training for all of our year 1 faculty with ITG, which is our academic IT support folks who are great. And that was actually a really nice partnership. It was a pretty good presentation. And one of the faculty members stood up afterwards and came up to me, and she looked like a deer in the headlights. Her eyes were just bugging out of her head. And she has lots and lots of slides for every lecture. And she basically said to me, you mean I have to like annotate every slide, like every image I have to, and she was freaking out. And so, I took her aside and we kind of sat down and I was like, it's going to be okay. like, let's just start one slide at a time, like, you know, and let's try to get one lecture done at a time, and I'll help you, and we'll just work on it until it's finished, right? And then if you need help as you change lectures or update things, you know, let me know. So it actually ended up being a really good conversation, but it started with her feeling like really, really overwhelmed.
Yeah, and I think that's so key is to be a resource in those moments where faculty are overwhelmed, and to let them know that everybody or a lot of people are learning as they go with this, especially when you're talking about digital accessibility, like starting small and showing them little ways, you know, to make things more accessible. One of the things that I've tried to do at my previous institution and the current one is to advocate for resources for faculty related to that, because a lot of faculty, I mean, at least from what I'm seeing, are reusing material year to year, and it's pretty dense. And so if they went back through and either recreated it or made it all accessible, it could be really tricky and very time consuming. So I advocated for some additional funding, and we have a team of student workers that are digital accessibility assistants that help us, you know, make PowerPoints and handouts and journal articles that they've, you know, dirty scanned, as we like to call it, accessible. And by offering that support and taking something off their plates, that, you know, they're more aware of those things in future. So the faculty that we've done those items for, what I find is, you know, when they do see somebody, you know, just scan something from a book or an article and hand it out to somebody else, those are the individuals now that are saying, you know, if a student needed this in an accessible format, this probably wouldn't work if they're using a screen reader. So I think the more you can be a resource and kind of let them know that this is a learning process, the better it is.
Marie, you had your hand up.
Right. I agree, Grace. I mean, that's such a great concept. What you did, that's amazing. Well done. But I think, yeah, we have to keep talking to the faculty. And again, I've found in the last couple of years, you know, working only with health science, you know, faculty, nurses, nurse practitioners, MDs, they get into their routines and they fear change. And that's okay. So if you are an institution that has, you know, instructional designers, we have a department of them. We have 4. So we realistically could have 1 for each college. I love to be able to tell the faculty, okay, this sounds like a lot, but here's the thing. This is what they're here for. This is what they know. You just have to give them the permission to go into your course shell and make the changes. But what you're going to have to do is go in and proofread everything, because we are not the medical experts. We are not MD, PA, elemental Ps. You have to check the work. And that really comes down to checking medical terminology, which then when they kind of see, oh, okay, I don't have to redo everything I did. So it's starting small, and it just started with basic conversations, and then seeing these amazing instructional designers we have on, you know, within our university, who have their own experiences that they bring to the table. It's just been a great process to witness, and I can't wait to see with the next few years how we can really transform more of our curriculum. And hate to say it, COVID kicked us in the tush to get us moving in this way of saying we need to record things, we need to have these transcripts, and it's not just a money issue. This is best practice. This is going to help everyone. It's not just for this subset of students. It is for all of our students.
Yeah, and you know, the piece, Marie, that you talked about, like letting them know, you know, like you just have to let them, you know, or give us permission to be in your course to make these things accessible. You know, that's really key. Our e-learning department was trying to speed things up and just automatically added my staff to some Blackboard shells. And so we got a lot of faculty saying, why are these people in there? But I did have the provost is very on board with our department and sent out a communication to faculty to explain, you know, why they see Angela or Bill that works for me, you know, in their shell. And they just were so thankful. And some of them were, I will say, prickly faculty members. I was surprised that at a chairs meeting actually said how easy it was, how nice it was, that, you know, it just was made accessible. And so we're seeing more people ask, you know, for training and supports and some, you know, more information about kind of the ADA basics. Because I think kind of like what you touched on, Marie, you know, the trash can issue, like something so small as, you know, changing your trash cans could create a barrier for a student where, you know, they'd have to either ask for help. And if we're talking about universal design, it's this, you know, individual should be able to use the item, you know, with dignity and respect, and not have to ask for help. So that's so key. I saw a question from JT specifically asking about some of the funding advocacy, and for that, internally, I advocated for student employment funds. I kind of framed it as a win-win, that this is a skill set that is only growing in need. And so giving some of our student workers the ability to, we have 3 tiers. The lowest level of digital accessibility assistant just does kind of the basic stuff, the easier stuff, and then they grow over time and take on more leadership. And actually by the end, they go out and do programming with student groups and with some faculties if they want to, faculty members if they want to do it within their department. So I partly framed it as a win for our students and a teachable career asset. But I also said, it's a really cost efficient way, especially a lot of our students, if they are federally, if they're federal funded or work study, it's covered 100%. So really by allocating just kind of more work study our way, it was a win-win for us. But even if we are paying students, I will say we have a harder time right now in the current environment, getting students at the traditional kind of lower rates. So we pay them a little bit more for this role, especially because if we weren't doing it in-house, I showed them how much it would cost if I sent it out to be remediated. So most of the advocacy I've done is for internal funding, saying, the faculty are the subject matter experts in their course or their program. So, it wouldn't be a great use of their time to go through and make this all accessible themselves. We want to give them time and space to teach. We're the experts in accessibility. So, we basically recommend, either doing it within our team with the student workers with somebody supervising or sending it out for remediation for dense documents.
There's a question from Marie. Can you share an example of a well-received response prepared by a medical student when asked, why do you have accommodations or what is wrong with you? Thank you. This is from an earlier post.
Sure. I tell my students, if you're ever asked by a faculty member or if you're on the clinical unit or anywhere in the hospital or on rotation, immersion, fill in the blank, you just can simply say, thank you so much for asking that question. What I'd like to do is direct you back to Marie, the Director of Student Accessibility Services, to address that question with you. So I tell them to make sure that, use the right titles, speak in a professional tone, and just refer them to me. And then I will tell that person the way of the world. I'm not going to tell the student what I'm going to really say, but it's just giving them that be prepared in the event this does happen. But again, that works for me. We are a small private health science institution. So I have the bandwidth to handle that. That may not be the reality for some of you out there with larger caseloads. So I think that's just, it's worked. I've gotten referrals from students. They've emailed me and said, someone did ask me about why I had that. And I just told them to go talk to you. And that kind of stopped them in their tracks. And I didn't get a follow-up question from the faculty or the clinical person. So, but it's really important for me to impress upon the students of professionalism, because that is something that they are evaluated on at Rush across all of our colleges and programs. And I think that's consistent with all of you as well. I said, you don't want to be reactive. You don't want to seem disrespectful, but you also want to be mindful of your rights as an individual with a disability. So just simply say, thank you for asking. I'm going to refer you to Marie. Have a nice day.
Well, thank you. Thank you so
No
much.
problem.
All right, so we're nearing time. Grace, you want to take it?
Yeah, so just a reminder, the book club website, this is the last book club, so registration might not be relevant for this particular series, but once we announce the next guided book discussion, check out registration there. You'll find copies of the discussion questions as well as facilitator information there. And if you're interested in purchasing a copy of the book, you can get it at 25% off plus shipping. Just use the code bookclub25 at springerpub.com. And for bulk purchases, which is 10 copies or more, you can always email Lee Montville and she can share more information about that. And with that, I also want to share real quick our book club giveaway for today. And the lucky winner is Sue Nam.
Hey.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Thank you.
Great. All All right, and so we are at time, but are there any burning questions anyone has that they'd like to ask before we depart? Okay.
All right. Those are reference and resources. And if anyone ever has questions, definitely check out the coalition's listserv, or, feel free to reach out to myself as someone who learned so much from the coalition. Always happy to pay that forward and answer questions you might have along the way.
And Lisa mentioned that all book clubs are recorded and available. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us. This has been a great discussion. And there was a question about should I send? Sue's wondering if she should send her mailing address. I imagine I'm not sure.
Yeah, and it looks like she should send it. So I saw docswithdisabilities.org. You could send it to docswithdisabilities.org. It looks like, Sue.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you guys, and have
Quick correction for Sue. My apologies. Send your address to Lisa Meeks, and she'll get you a copy of that book.
Wonderful. Right. So all this information will be shared with anyone. And again, thank you, and have a wonderful weekend.
Take care.